Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm not an expert on the Holocaust, and a lot of stories, experiences have been published by people who have experienced in the Holocaust. And what I'm going to do is just to add another one. And the only thing that's special about it is that it is to do with my family. Now, the actual people involved won't be of particular interest to you, but I hope that some of the things that happened may be of interest to you. My mother was married in 1919 in a place called Bartenstein in West Prussia, and there she is, and there's her husband. She was one of four sisters. She was the youngest of four sisters, and they're all here in this picture. There's sister number one, the eldest, and that's her husband. That's sister number two and her husband. Sister number three and her husband, and that's my mother and my father, Ismar Hirsch. These children here, there was some importance in my story. These, in the sailor's outfit, these boys, and also that girl, belong to that couple, the eldest sister. And this little boy here belongs to family number three. He also features. Also in this picture is the mother of all these four sisters, and there are other people there. I asked myself the question, well, what's happened to all of them in the Nazi period? And that's what my talk is about. Where do they all come from? Well, my mother was born in a place called Schwitz on the Vistula, or near Schwitz, anyway. And my father was born in a little place down here. I also have a stepfather, and he was born in Bromberg, also in West Prussia. After the First World War, what happened was the whole of West Prussia was ceded to Poland, so it became Polish. And it was the Polish corridor, except for a region around Danzig, which was a free state. And the people you saw in the picture who were married, the eldest lived in Bartenstein in East Prussia. That's where the wedding took place. The sister number three and her husband lived in a place called Lyck near the East Prussian border. Sister number two and her husband actually lived in Breslau in Silesia, which is actually in Germany. It's down here somewhere. And my mother and her new husband went to Berlin. The significance of all this is nobody stayed in Poland. They didn't like Poland in those days. Now these people were all assimilated Germans. They considered themselves to be Germans with a Jewish religion. And so they fought in the German army. And this picture here shows you my father in his German uniform. And he fought in the horse artillery, and he was at Verdun, fighting against the French, I'm glad to say, not the English. And he got the Iron Cross second class, and you see the ribbon here. And one of the other people there of military age, husband of sister number three, was also in the German army. He fought in the Eastern Front and also got an Iron Cross second class. Now, I'm now going to talk about what happened to the family of sister number one, the eldest. That's her husband, and these three children here and the girl, but not this little boy. And the other person of significance is back here, called Fred. This is what happened. They were called Isakowski, but they changed their name to Irwig later. They lived in Bartenstein, which was in East Prussia. Now, the person who emigrated first was, in fact, their eldest son, Herbert. He married in Germany somebody called Kate Voss, and they emigrated to South Africa in 1936. Now, why did they go to South Africa? The reason why they went to South Africa is because Kate had an elder brother who was already established in South Africa, and he sponsored them to come to South Africa. And that's a common theme, almost common to all these emigrations of these people. They then went to the US later on in 1975. They had two sons, Henry, you'll see a picture of in a minute, and Leslie. Now, what happened to the parents? Well, Gustav Isakowski actually died natural causes in 1930. Gertrude, the mother, actually joined her son, Herbert, in 1938. Now, Fred Irwig, he is a nephew of Gustav, and he studied medicine in Germany. And at the end of his medical studies, he got an offer from the United States, from Kansas City, for a medical position, which he took up. And so he emigrated quite early in 1923 to take up that position. Having got that position, he was then able to sponsor both Harry Irwig, that's one of the other little boys there, and Ruth Irwig, Harry's sister. Harry went to Kansas City in 1933. He studied law, became a lawyer. He joined the American Army and assisted in the legal procedures at the Nuremberg trial. Ruth Irwig also went to Kansas City, sponsored by Fred Irwig. Now, I'm going to show you a picture now of Herbert Irwig. He was the eldest son who had emigrated to South Africa in 1936. There he is with his family in 1956, and that's his wife, Kate Voss. Okay, and the occasion was Henry's bar mitzvah, and that's Henry here, and that's Leslie, and that's actually the mother of Herbert. Now, the point about showing you this is that Kate had an elder sister called Elsa Voss, and she was married in Germany, and they lost contact during the war, and they wondered what had happened to them, and unfortunately, you can see it at the bottom here, they were all gassed in Auschwitz in 1943. And when they made their inquiries to find out what had happened to them, this is the letter they got, and what a poignant letter it is. They were told that the husband and Elsa and the daughter were taken by train from Prague to Terezin on such and such a date, 1942, in train so-and-so. And then the whole family left Terezin for Auschwitz, which is in fact a little village next to Auschwitz. That's really Auschwitz. On the 6th of September 42, on train such and such. The German efficiency was such that they documented all these deportations. It was incredible. We have been informed that this transport was gassed on the 7th of March 1943. Imagine you're Kate Voss and her husband, and you've tried to find out what happened to them, and this is the letter that you get. What a poignant occasion. It's terrible. I'm now going to talk about what happened to sister number 2. That's a picture taken in 1938 in Berlin. It's actually on the occasion of a wedding party for sister number 3 and her husband. The people I want to talk about are this couple here, sister number 2 and her husband, and also they had 2 daughters, and this is one of them, called Ruth. The other one had already emigrated to South Africa. So what happened to them? Well, Annie Less, that's my mother's sister, died of breast cancer in 1941 in Berlin. Gustav, her husband, they were called Gotthilf. He was transported to a concentration camp in Poland, Traunkiki, a concentration camp where he perished in 1942. Incidentally, it says here Breslau, later Berlin. The reason why they moved from Breslau to Berlin was because they thought it was safer to be there. But it didn't help poor Gustav. Well, Ellen Gotthilf, that's their eldest daughter, she emigrated to South Africa in 1936, to Cape Town. Why did she go there? It's in order to get married to somebody, her fiancé, who was already there. So it's again a question of having got the contact there. She'd actually, in the end, she didn't marry him. She did have a daughter, Josie, in 1944 here. Unfortunately, she had a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized in Cape Town. And poor old Josie was in fact in a Jewish orphanage in the Cape. Then the other one, Ruth Gotthilf, that's the person that I pointed out to you in the previous picture. She stayed with her parents, and she had a fiancé in Berlin, but unfortunately they couldn't get out, and she got worried towards the end of August 39. So she decided to leave, and she got sponsorship to go to the UK. We believe that in fact she was sponsored by my mother, who had already got there. I'll tell you about that later on. And she emigrated to the UK on the 1st of September 1939, leaving it rather late. The story is that when the train got to the German-Dutch border, it stopped. And I have to tell you, I remember exactly the same thing happening to me in the Kindertransport. The train stopped. And the German police then came up. And, she got very worried that would she be taken off, because her passport said she was Jewish. And there was a nice English lady sitting next to her, and she said to Ruth, why don't you speak English to me, and then they'll think we're a mother and daughter. And that is exactly what she did, and she got through all right. She then, later on, she got Josie over and looked after her, because Ellen couldn't do it, and then she got Ellen to come over too, and unfortunately she was hospitalized in Epsom Hospital for the rest of her life. Now I'm going to talk about family number 3. That's the third sister. And the reason why I'm showing you this picture is that they started, the person who initiated their emigration was their son, Bernie. That was that little chap in the front row of my mother's wedding picture. And this is now in 1934. He was 20. He was born in 1914. And there he is. That's him. That's Bernie. Okay, that's my mother. That's my brother, who was born in 1920, and that's me, born in 1925. And that lady is somebody called Lisa Meyersohn, and I'll tell you about what happened to her later on. And Bernie left a lot of notes, and one of the things that he told us was that he had a cousin, a girl cousin, who, it must have been about 1931 or 1932. She was in a school, girls' school, in I think it was Königsberg, and a Nazi came along and eulogized about how marvelous the Aryan race is compared with all other races. And, she said fair hair and blue eyes, and she pointed to a person in the class, and the rest of the girls killed themselves laughing because she happened to be a Jewess. Now, when Hitler came to power in 1933, the writing was on the wall, and people were prepared to go anywhere where they could go. The first thing that happened was a boycott of Jewish shops, and that made livelihood difficult. Then there was the doctors, dentists, and lawyers were only allowed to have as clients Jewish people, and that made life difficult for them. Stories of killings started to be circulated, and Jews with known contacts abroad were forced to write to these contacts to tell them that things were absolutely marvelous here, and all these horror stories that were circulating were fake news. There's an odd thing that happened in 1934. A new law permitted Jews to buy property in Switzerland from Germans who owned property there but wanted to return to Germany. And when Bernie heard about this, he immediately went to Switzerland and to suss this out and to meet somebody who was on the list of people coming back. And when he got there, the chap changed his mind, so he went back to Germany. He married in 1935 and then had a son in 1936. What he wanted to do was to go to Palestine, and he went to a farming school near Berlin for courses to teach them. To teach Jewish people wanting to do a kibbutz all the things that they had to know, and that's what he did. And he was on a list of people to emigrate to Palestine with capital, but the British who were in charge of the Palestine Mandate were very sparing with their visas. They were terrified of uprisings from the Arabs, and and then incidentally, I should perhaps mention that this picture in 1934 was taken in a place called Ferch. Now, Ferch is a little place near Potsdam where my parents had a holiday cottage. That's where that was taken. In 1938, Bernie found that, or heard, that the Argentine government had decided to let in a few hundred Jews, and he immediately applied for one of these places to go to the Argentine, and he got accepted. He then paid all his taxes. The way the Germans operated, they wanted to get rid of the Jews as quickly as possible, but on the other hand, they wanted to get as much money out of them as they could possibly get. and so in order to get out, you had to pay special taxes, and he paid these taxes. I mean, he writes that he paid 88,000 Deutschmark, which is a hell of a lot. And he was allowed to take out 8,000 and some property. And then he emigrated with his wife and daughter in February 1939. When he got there, he then concentrated on getting the immigration papers ready for his father and mother, who are in fact here. Okay, and there's a picture of their wedding anniversary. While I've got this picture up, I also want to mention who these people are here, those four. That, in fact, is my own family. That's my mother. That's my stepfather. My father died in 1936. And that's my brother John, and that's me. In fact, all the four sisters are still on this picture, and their mother there. As I said, that Bernie then organized, or tried to organize, the emigration of his parents, those two I mentioned to you. This is summarized here. I'll explain this. They were called Perl. They came from Lyck in East Prussia. As I said, the person who emigrated first was Bernie, the little boy, and he went to Buenos Aires in 1939 there. Then what he did, he sent the immigration papers back to his parents here. And Joseph, the father, immediately went to the Argentine embassy and said, please, can you give me the visa to go? And he was told, oh, you're a bit late because the Argentine government has changed its rules, it no longer will accept Jewish refugees. And that was a big blow. Then the next thing that Bernie did when he heard this, he got them a permit to go to Paraguay here, okay? And he sent that off to them, and then advised them to get a boat ticket at the same time, which turned out to be most important. Well, just after Joseph had got this thing for Paraguay, he was picked up by the Gestapo. At that time, there was a lot of interrogation of Jews and sending them to concentration camps. And he was interrogated by the Gestapo, and so he showed them the visa he had to go to Paraguay, and also the boat ticket. He was about to go, and that's the quickest way they can get rid of him. And the man fortunately let him go, but he warned him that he had to get out pretty quick, and if he was picked up again, he would go into concentration camp. There was just one problem, and the problem was that the boat actually went from Southampton. What that meant, he had to get a transit visa through the UK. And he found this extremely difficult. He tried a number of consulates, and they all said no. I think they were all terrified. This was just a ruse to get into the country. In the end, he ended up in Hamburg, desperate. The consul there told him exactly the same story. It took the same line. But then he got a second interview, and he got a pistol with him. And he said, look, you've got two alternatives. Either you give me the transit visa, or I'll shoot myself and you'll have a dead body on your hands. And that did it. He did get the transit visa. He immediately went to Holland and then to the UK with his wife. They took a handbag. That was all they managed to take with them. All their belongings remained behind. The boat went to Uruguay, and they got out in Uruguay. But then instead of going to Paraguay, he was transported secretly in a rowing boat to Argentina, and then he joined his eldest son, Bernie, who was already there. That was an illegal immigration, but that was legalized later on. Now, the other thing to say about this, that Joseph had, in fact, 3 brothers. 2 of them, miraculously, survived in Belgium throughout the war. But the first wife and 2 children of one of these 2 brothers was gassed, who had perished in concentration camps. And the third brother, wife and daughter, also perished in concentration camps. Now, what happened? I'll now talk about what happened to us, my immediate family. And I'm showing you this because in the 1930s, we lived in a part of the Berlin which is called Berlin-Schöneberg, near the Bayerischer Platz. And at the Bayerischer Platz was what was called a Stürmerkasten. The Nazis spread virulent anti-Semitic propaganda. They didn't have the internet or social media. Instead, there was this anti-Semitic newspaper, the Stürmer, a paper, a tabloid, published by one Julius Streicher, and who just spread anti-Semitic fake stories. Here's a sort of example of the kind of story that he picked up, somebody called Alfred Fabian, and it was all fake news. And the sort of things that was reported there was the Jews were responsible for losing the war, and they was responsible for the recession, and there was the blood libels and so on. And these papers were put into flat boxes about 1 meter high and maybe 2 meters wide, with a chicken wire in front so that people couldn't ruin them. They were put up at prominent places so that people would read them. And I saw this many a time because we lived very close, and I have to say it was very frightening for a young chap like myself. And incidentally, at the bottom of each one of these, it appeared once a week. At the bottom of it, it says, "Die Juden sind unser Unglück," which means the Jews are our misfortune. My parents wanted to go to Palestine, and they were told that a good idea is to buy special furniture when you go to Palestine. And one of the things they said was, if you get an apartment in Palestine, you find they don't have rosettes in the ceiling. So if you want to light a room, you have to get a standard lamp and with a big bulb in the front, and then shed the light onto the ceiling, and that's how you lit the place up. I have to say they never got to Palestine, but that lamp did come to the UK. Well, the first one who, in fact, emigrated was my brother. And he's in this picture here. That's him. 1938, he'd just done his Abitur, leaving examination. There, incidentally, is a picture of Hindenburg. I think it's got swastikas in the corners. But anyway, that's the end of the school year. And what he wanted to do was to study physics or engineering. But he couldn't go to university in Germany. That wasn't allowed. And then my mother found out that through a contact she had in London, that his master's voice was running a scheme for young Jewish refugees of his sort of age who were interested in physics and engineering to join their research department as research assistants or technicians. He applied for one of these posts and got it, and so he emigrated in August 1938. He lived in Hayes, where the firm was, and he worked on fluorescent screens for oscillographs throughout the war. For radar purposes, that's what they did. And in the evening, he went to evening classes and he got himself, first of all, a general BSc degree and then a special BSc degree in physics at Birkbeck College. And after the war, he went and did research at Birkbeck College towards the PhD. Now, what about me? I was also at the same school, the Treitschke Schule in Berlin, but I was kicked out at this stage because we were no longer allowed to go to secondary schools like this. So I transferred to a Jewish school, the Goldschmidt Schule, in Berlin. This is just a picture of my brother. We got married in 1948. He took up an academic career at Birkbeck College. He's a lecturer in physics and then a reader in physics. And that's me here, still with a lot of hair, I have to say. Now, that means my mother, my stepfather, and myself were left in Berlin. So what happened to us? Well, my mother was advised that the best way to get us out is in fact to organize somehow or other for her to get to London and get sponsorship organized sponsorship from there. So what she did is she got in contact with, she had this contact in London, and she asked him to send a telegram to say that my brother was dangerously ill and she had to come to see him immediately. And armed with this, she went to the British consulate to get a visa. Now, I have to tell you, it was very difficult to get visas in those days, but she did get it. And I have to say that my brother and I, much, much later, many years later, and you'll see why in a minute, we wondered whether, in fact, she had benefited from the fact that at that time there was somebody called Frank Foley in the British Embassy. He was an MI6 spy, and he was based in Berlin, and his cover was that he was consular official for giving out visas. But what people didn't know until very much later, he actually died in 1958. And the story didn't come out until somebody called Michael Smith really found out what went on. And it turned out that Frank Foley bent the rules. He gave out many more visas than he should have done. But he never talked about it because he was sworn to secrecy, of course, being an MI6 man. What happened subsequently, that he was in fact recognized by Yad Vashem as the righteous amongst nations. So my mother got this visa and she came to England, but it was only for 7 days. But the Jewish Refugee Organization had a good scheme. They had a list of possible openings for people like her. If you got a job, the arrangement was, if you got a job, then you could extend your visa. And she got a job as a domestic servant with a family in Chelsea. She had a very, very hard time, I have to say. But anyway, that's what happened. And I have, well, so, well, the next thing really is what happened to my stepfather, myself. We were left behind, okay? And now, here I'm showing the two extracts in German of a publication called 1938 Berlin Metropolis, Stumme Zeugen der Geschichte, or Silent Witnesses of History. What happened was that Hitler wanted to make Berlin the biggest and most magnificent metropolis in the world. But in order to do this, he needed space, or rather his architect Speer needed space. And the way he got space was that they had to ask good Aryan Germans to leave their apartments, and they had to be rehoused, and they were rehoused in apartments occupied by Jews. And the Jews were then evicted, and they were housed in what was called Judenhäuser. And my stepfather and I were kicked out in 1938 of our apartment. All our belongings were put in store, and we got into a Judenhaus in the Levetzowstrasse 11A, and we shared this 6-room apartment with 5 other people. We each had a room, and there was a communal kitchen. And this gives you, well, it shows you, in fact, that's the name of my Zahnarzt Herbert Meyersohn. That's the name of my stepfather, Herbert Meyersohn. He was a dentist. And one of the other people there was actually somebody called Dr. Julius Moses. And he was actually an MP in the German parliament, but he was forced to go into this Judenhaus too. And while my stepfather and I managed to get out, he didn't. And in the summer of 1942, he was deported, and he died in Theresienstadt. We were in the Levetzowstrasse, and a few houses down from us was a synagogue, big synagogue in Berlin in the Levetzowstrasse. And we were there on the night of the 9th and 10th of November 1938, the Kristallnacht. I mean, the origin of the Kristallnacht is more or less approximately that the Germans decided they wanted to get rid of all the Jews with Polish origin, and the Poles didn't want to take them in and made very heavy weather of it. And the result was the Germans kicked out all these Jews with Polish origin on the end of October, and they were all stuck. Many of them, some of them got into Poland, but many of them got stuck at the boundary between the two countries and were in terrible conditions. There was a young chap called Herschel Grünspan, who was the son of one of the people stuck like this. He was in Paris, and he was incredibly incensed, and he got hold of a pistol and went to the German embassy and demanded to see a consular official and shot him dead. It turned out apparently that he shot the wrong man, because this particular chap actually had anti-Nazi sympathies. But anyway, it was the excuse for the Germans, the Nazis, to start a pogrom, effectively. The SA, aided by other people, rounded up many Jews for transport to concentration camps in the Kristallnacht. And a lot of Jewish shops were ransacked, and there was glass all over the place, which is, of course, the reason for the name Kristall. It was all very frightening. And my stepfather and I were very lucky, because we weren't, in fact, affected. We kept a low profile and didn't go out. And nothing happened to us, fortunately, except being terrified. Anyway, near us was this big synagogue in the Levetzowstrasse. This is what it looks like. It was built in 1914, and this is another picture of it with must have been taken much earlier, of where Jews actually waiting to go into the synagogue. And what happened was, in the Kristallnacht, a lot of synagogues were very heavily damaged, and so was this one too. It was heavily damaged. Nevertheless, the damage wasn't sufficient. It was used by the Nazis in 1941 and 42 as a collection point for Jewish deportees to Auschwitz. Later on in the war, the synagogue was damaged further by Allied bombing, and then it was pulled down in 1955, and then much later a memorial was set up on the site of the Levetzowstrasse synagogue, and there is part of it very poignant. This is in fact a picture of it is an example of a side of a cattle truck which was used to transport the Jews to Auschwitz. I think these are stylized people here, and this is the ramp, or supposed to be the ramp at which they were taken out. It's a very poignant picture of what happened. This cattle truck memorial, the site of the Levetzowstrasse synagogue. And where we lived in 11A Levetzowstrasse, which is a few houses down, there are now Stolperstein in front of Levetzowstrasse 11A, where we lived. And a Stolperstein is a stumble stone. I don't know, many of you may have seen them, but if you've been to Germany. This is one in front of 11A, in memory of Gertrude Walter, who was deported in Gertrude Walter was deported in 1942 and murdered in Auschwitz. And there's another one of her husband there as well. They probably moved. They weren't living there when my stepfather and I was there, but they probably moved into the place which we had vacated. Anyway, in the meantime, my mother had organized a sponsor for me through the Jewish Refugee Organization, which at this time was very efficient. It had a list of such people. And she got in touch with this chap here, it's called Max Halfin, who was in fact a Russian Jew who had emigrated in 1920, and he ran a taxi business. You can see the way the taxis looked at this time in 1938. He agreed to act as my sponsor for a kinder transport. And that's how I got a visa and then went on a kinder transport on the 1st of January 1939. And I stayed with him for a few months. They looked after me extremely well. And then my mother persuaded him to act as sponsor for my stepfather. And you offered him a job as clerical assistant in his taxi business. And on the basis of this, he got an entry visa to the UK, and so he could come over. And I have to say that the British government at that time, while they were very sparing with the official quota for people to emigrate, they had this policy that if anybody could arrange it privately, so they could be sponsored, they would make no objection to them coming in. And many thousands of Jews came over that way. And that policy, I'm afraid, is not used by the present government on the refugees from other parts. That's another story. So my stepfather then made all the necessary arrangements to come over. And if I can turn this page. this actually shows the exit document. Here's a copy of the exit document. As I said before, you had to pay all the taxes before they let you out. And this tells you that he in fact paid all the Reichsfluchtsteuer taxes and all the other taxes. And so that was okay. There's a nasty little comment here which says it's only valid till the end of April. And this document is dated, I think, the 18th of January. So he had to work hard, because if he didn't get out by the end of April, he'd have to start all over again, make new applications and new payments. And so as a result of this, he then came over. Also, some belongings came with him, and he and my mother got a flat in Fulham, where they set up a house, and I joined them. The other thing is that one of the other things he had to do, I mentioned to you this cottage that we had in Ferch, that they were forced to sell that at a knockdown price. In fact, they got about 1/10 of what the real price was for it. Anyway, my stepfather then came to the UK, and at the beginning of the war, he, like all the other German refugees, were interned. Okay, but they were then given the option to join the Pioneer Corps, and he agreed to that, and that's him in Pioneer Corps uniform. He was called Herbert Meyersohn, but he was worried, what would he do after the war in this country? He was a dentist, but it turned out that the professional license that he had in Germany was not accepted in the UK. These professional institutions are very jealous of their rules. And so what he decided to do was to work in the evenings after having had a hard day's work in the Pioneer Corps. He worked in the evenings to pass some additional exams they asked him to do, and that is what he did. And then the Pioneer Corps actually let him out for a few months to go to Guy's Hospital to do practical work, and the result of this was that he got his license to work as a British dentist after the war. Now, in the meantime, what about me? Well, my guarantor, 2 weeks after I arrived here, he enrolled me in the school called Sloane School in Chelsea. I couldn't speak any English, and all the boys took the mickey out of me. And I remember there was an occasion when they made me go up to a mathematics teacher who had the nickname of Boozer. I didn't know what Boozer meant, so I went up to him and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Boozer, can you explain this, that, and the other?" And the result was write 10,000 lines after the end of the class. And so there you are. That's the sort of thing. But never mind, we got over that. At the beginning of the war, the school was evacuated to Addlestone in Surrey, as it says here. Okay, and I got my higher school certificate in 1943, and then went up to St Catherine's College in Cambridge in 1943. Now, this is a picture, 1947, and the reason for showing it is this. Towards the end of the war, there appeared to be suddenly an acute shortage of dentists in the British Army Dental Corps. And then the government suddenly decided, there are all these people with dentist qualifications in the Pioneer Corps, why don't we use them? The fact they don't have English qualification doesn't matter. So they were transferred to the Dental Corps. My stepfather was transferred to the Dental Corps, and he worked in Woolwich Arsenal for the rest of the war, and then he was demobbed, I think, in 1947. And this transfer would have occurred whether you'd had this English qualification or not, but there we are anyway. So the upshot of this is, and this picture, yeah, perhaps I should just say, he ended up the war as a captain in the dental corps. That's my mother, and that's me, still with a lot of hair. Now, the upshot is my father fought on the German side in the First World War and got the Iron Cross. My stepfather was in the British Army in the Second World War. In the meantime, I'd read natural sciences in Cambridge and got a BA in physics, and then stayed on to do research in the Cavendish and got a PhD, and then I stayed on postdoctoral work and then took up an academic career. And in 1959, I married this very nice lady who was a widow, Steve Kellar, and she had 2 children. So I acquired through this marriage 2 very nice stepchildren. And I have to tell you, one of them is here today. It's this one, and he's helping me with my presentation. But unfortunately, he no longer has that lovely fringe. So this is a summary then of what about my own family, which is a Hirsch and Meyersohn family. This is where they were all born in West Prussia, and well, I've told you about all these things here, but I want to mention these 2 things here, and also about my father. He died in 1936, but he built up a textile business. I mean, he went to Berlin in 1920, built up a textile business there. But when the boycott started, it was no longer financially profitable. And so he was forced to hand it over to his second in command, who was a Gentile. And the sad story is that he was double-crossed by him. I've never found out the details, but it was very serious double-crossing. Anyway, my stepfather, Herbert, had an elder brother called Siegbert. He was a doctor. He was one of these people who said, oh, the Germans are very cultured people. Oh, they could never do anything so horrible to us. And unfortunately, he was picked up and they perished in a concentration camp. Now, I showed you on one of these pictures this a lady who was, in fact, Lisa, the young lady called Lisa Meyersohn. That was the picture taken in 1934 in front of the cottage that we had. Now, the remarkable thing about Lisa was she was the daughter of Siegbert. She was a nurse, but she was sheltered and survived in Berlin throughout the war. A remarkable story how that happened. And then she emigrated to Palestine. So, in summary then, I'd like to say this. 3 of the 4 less sisters and families survived. One husband perished in a concentration camp. The fate of a number of the relations of the 1919 wedding picture is unknown, but certainly we failed to make any contacts with them after the war, and I'm sure that some of them did not survive the war. Those who did survive fled to where they could, not where they wanted to go. The 3 surviving sisters and families found refuge in South Africa, USA, Argentina, and the UK. It's an example of the diaspora resulting from Nazi oppression. Much ingenuity and help from others was needed to make successful escapes. Many who escaped were in their 50s and 60s and showed remarkable determination, resourcefulness to rebuild their lives, the new land, contributed to their new countries. In 1936, Chaim Weizmann described the situation accurately. The world seemed to be divided into 2 parts, those places where the Jews could not live and those they could not enter. Thank you for listening.